mean, you know that thing that you're talking about, the doors closing?
Yeah.
Have you read this book, the Gulag Archipelago, that Jordan Peterson talks about all the time?
Alexander Solzhenitsyn.
Yes. I'm so glad you could pronounce his name, because I was just going to say Gulag Archipelago and skip over the author. But he taught, there's a description in there about arrest, what it's like to be arrested, and how the moment you're arrested, this basically a chasm opens up between you and the world that you used to be a part of. And that chasm it gets to a point where you're gone. You're gone. Yeah. You are gone. And this is why, this is something that just fucking pisses me off, man. When Jeff Sessions is like sending out letters to people, or sending out letters saying that we should start enforcing the mandatory minimum prison sentences. And this is something that I think is so haunting right now. You're fine. You were fine. You made a friend in there. You got a free Snickers bar. Yeah. You shoplifted the right way by putting it in your stomach. They couldn't get it out. But one of the haunting things that like really gets to me is how all of us are kind of programmed to ignore the fact that our prisons are filled up with people, some of them who did just take a Snickers bar, many of them who just had some mushrooms, or, I know someone who a few years ago got busted with mushrooms, and it's really fucking scary, and like how his attorney told him, if they want to, they can put you in jail for 20 years for this. 20 years. Think about that. The next time you're like joking about it or talking about it on the phone with people or whatever, really think about that. Man, I'm being a bummer. Fucking watch out. Seriously, because this is the thing that like really gets to me, because as a society, we ignore the fact that our prisons are filled up with all of these sweet Snickers. There's so many Snickers right now, so many people in there right now who did nothing at all. Nothing at all.
What's interesting that, one of the things I talk about a lot on my podcast, and you do as well, is consciousness and sacred plants and, the healing potential of psychedelics and all this. And it's so interesting that every culture that's ever had access to these substances has seen them as the greatest gift of the gods. The greatest thing that the gods have bestowed upon humanity was this peyote or these mushrooms, or in Africa, this dance that helps you enter a trance, right? The musical forms in Africa. And here we are in this weird aberration, the one society where you go to prison for longer for having a significant quantity of hallucinogens than if you had killed someone.
Right.
Minimum mandatory sentences for second-degree murder are less than they are for like a pound of mushrooms. What does that say?
What do you
Every society saying this is great, except there's one society that says we'll put you in a cage for the rest of your life. To me, what that says is those societies value truth. This society is terrified of truth.
Wow.
Yeah. But let's talk about floating. You know what I saw the first time I floated?
Hold on, wait. We're not going to fucking talk about floating. He didn't want to.
He's a cop. Fuck that guy.
Hold on. We'll get to floating.
Right.
But before we dive into that, I want to talk about this idea of truth. If you're saying that our society doesn't want us to contact this truth, what is that truth? Like, what is it telling us? What is the message that we're getting from mushrooms, from LSD, from ayahuasca? What is the message that we're getting that this society that we're in right now doesn't want us to have?
Well, I think, you can look at an intermediary level and say it's about valuing the integrity of nature over an open pit mine, It's about valuing relationships and sensuality over ambition and acquisition of material things, those sorts of things. I mean, there are a lot of examples of that, right? Love over possession, all these kinds of things. But I think on a more profound level, what those substances have shown me, and I think show a lot of people, is the deepest truth is that there are many truths. And so doubt is sort of the only thing you should really ever be certain of. And that the culture's values, that the culture is so insistent on instilling in you, you start to question them. So I think it's not that these substances or physical travel, which I consider to be very similar to tripping. That's why I guess we call it tripping.
Right.
It shows you what Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, called detribalization, where you recognize that you're part of a tribe, and then it's like, oh, wait, I'm in a tribe, so all the shit that I think is true is just what my tribe says. I just speak that language. So then you get out and you start looking back from another place where you see multiple truths and multiple worlds.
Right.
And then you're in a whole different way of thinking, so that when your government says, pledge allegiance, motherfucker, you're like, to what?
Right.
Go fight in this war. For whom?
Right.
Yeah. So I think it's critical thinking is basically what these substances instill in a strange way.
And this idea is an idea I think about quite a bit, because the implication of what you're saying is that there is a conspiracy that is so dark. It is so dark that you could almost just, as a form of laziness, call it Luciferianism. Not to insult Lucifer. Actually, I don't want to. Probably isn't Luciferianism, because Lucifer was a rebel angel. Yeah. But it's like this idea is so incredibly dark. And this is where, I think that there's a lot of walls that have been built inside of us. A lot of walls that we're not supposed to cross if we are going to be productive members of American society.
Right.
And one of the walls is this wall that you're talking about, because the question is, who fucking built this wall? Who built this wall between us and these substances? Who is it? Is it Jeff Sessions? Is there, and I would love to know your thoughts on this. Do you think there's an organized cabal of people who are like, we can't let them take mushrooms or they'll realize that we're lizards? Do you... I mean, do you think
maybe
that?
Maybe not lizards, maybe assholes.
Okay, so, right. Yeah, lizards are cool. I
think...
I don't mean to diss lizards or Lucifer here, man, but who's behind it, man? I mean, it's like a real problem. Who's behind it? Who's engineered it?
I think there are different levels. So you can look at it, if you want to look at it as a conspiracy, I think there's plenty of evidence for that. So you look at Harry Anslinger, for example, who was the head of the division of the government that was responsible for enforcing the laws in prohibition against alcohol distribution. So then whatever amendment it was that made alcohol legal again was passed, and then he was like, oh shit, now this whole division of the government's going to be liquidated. I'm going to lose a job. Everyone's going to lose their job. We need to find something else to prohibit.
Right.
So what's it going to be? Well, blacks and Mexicans are using this marijuana stuff, so let's drum up a lot of hysteria against that so we won't lose our jobs. So that's the origins of the anti-marijuana crusade in the United States. It was all about the flow of money and keeping the money moving. Then you have the example in the Nixon administration where I think it was H.R. Haldeman who was recently interviewed about this, who some of you might remember was in the cabinet. I don't remember what his position was. But he said, talking about the drug laws, the draconian Nixon war on drugs thing, primarily against hallucinogens and marijuana, he said, we knew that psychedelics and marijuana weren't health hazards, but we needed to isolate and neutralize the people who were protesting the Vietnam War, which was mostly the hippies, and the people who were agitating in the cities, which was the blacks. And those are drugs that those people were using, so we made them illegal so we could throw them in prison, investigate them, wipe them out. He said this in an interview. I don't remember. I mean, look it up online.
Yeah,
it's everywhere. You know what I'm talking about? It was like in Vanity Fair or something recently. And so, you know, there it is. It's like they know, anyone who looked at marijuana with any seriousness knew damn well it wasn't dangerous.
But we're many presidents away from Nixon, and they're still enforcing these insane laws. So
they're enforcing it against black people, against poor people. See, this is the thing. Like,
right.
I mean, I don't know about your friend who got busted with the mushrooms, and it's true that a lot of people at Dead shows were getting busted, and there's a lot of bullshit around that. But you could, if you have access to lawyers, you know. I mean, I went to a college where everybody was tripping every weekend, and no, there were never cops there.
Well, so now we enter into something that's like even more horrifying, which is that now we have like this is where my mind really starts fucking spinning, which is that so this country is built on slavery. We all know that, and slavery ends, except in the prisons, because in the prisons people have to work. You have to work. There's work. So a lot of like, I guess license plates really do get made in prisons. Lots of
live free or die. Live free or die.
Yes.
New Hampshire slogan on the license plates.
If you really want your fucking head to spin, think about this. Our attorney general from Alabama wants to start enforcing mandatory minimums again. For those of you who don't know what that is, that means that if you get pulled over and you've got some acid in your pocket, you will go to jail for 5 years. There is a 5-year mandatory minimum.
The judge cannot not send you to jail.
Yes, you're going to jail. So when you think about the statistics, which is that, more than likely, you're not going to jail if you're white. If you're not going to get busted, you're not going to get pulled over. But if you're black, you're going. Yeah. And when you're in prison, you're going to have to do slave labor. So if you really want your fucking head to spin, think about that. A fucking attorney general from Alabama has figured out a way to make slavery happen again. Yeah. That's spooky, man. Yeah. That's spooky. And that's really happening right now. And this is a thing where I wanted to ask you, because when my head starts spinning like that, I start feeling hopeless, Chris Ryan. So, another example is I was just in the airport and like going through TSA. Thick fucking security. It's getting worse. They're getting worse about it now. Like they're getting more intense, more scrutinizing, more like authoritarian. They don't. And there was a period with the TSA where they would try to be sweet. They're not doing that anymore. And as I was walking into the fucking TSA, there's like these like hardcore thuggish looking fucking cops, packing heat, looking at all of us, tourists, kids, old ladies. No one there is going to hurt anybody, right? And we're being fucking processed. Our shit's being rifled through. And we accept it. We're just like, this is what it's like now. Our shit gets rifled through now. We just get rifled through and we want to travel. And I had this very hopeless feeling. I thought, how does this get better? When does this change? Can this change? Is there anything that could be done to make this go away? What do you think?
You want me to say this publicly?
Yes.
Well, I've lived in Europe most of my life, right? And I think one of the things that's interesting in Europe is that the memory of fascism is fresh, relatively. There are lots of people who remember when Spain was like that, right? Franco died in the 70s, late 70s. World War II, Spanish Civil War, it's recent. So I think there's a vigilance in people there, not to let shit go that way again, that is lacking in the U.S. There's a lot of I've been driving around in Idaho, and there's all these signs, all this like political sloganeering and stuff. But I think, most of these yahoos in the mountains with their AR-15s, if shit gets bad, they're not serious. They're not going to be shooting at military vehicles. I think Americans are so out of touch with war because all the war, and we're an incredibly warlike culture, but we export it. We send the soldiers off, and then we ignore them when they get back.
We've been at war, the 80% of American history, we've been at war.
Yeah, and that's, I don't know, probably 100% if you really look at it. But anyway, I mean, what can be done? I think that what we're doing here is actually what can be done. I think we're using podcasts. You guys are using float tanks. Other people are using ayahuasca and sacred substances or meditation or all these different techniques to free your mind and your heart and your ability to communicate with other people. I think that's where revolution really happens. The revolution of the bombs in the street and the fires and the kind of public screaming sirens, I feel like that, it's meet the new boss, same as the old boss shit,
Right.
It's some other power just takes over and plays the same game.
Right.
The only way to have a real revolution, they say think globally, act locally. I would take that, act personally. You have a revolution in your life, in your heart, in your marriage, in your friendships, and hopefully that ripples out and becomes a better world. That's all I got.
You had that revolution? You've had that revolution inside of you?
I think that I never signed on to modernity in the first place.
Right.
Like I was retired the day I finished college, I've never really plugged into, I haven't had a job since the 90s.
So right. So, but what about people who have had the job and people who are, firmly solidified inside of the system?
I think they're feeling it. There's this line that we quote in Sex at Dawn from Arthur Miller, the playwright, who says, an era can be considered over when its basic illusions have been exhausted.
Wow.
Right? And I think you look at the world we're living in now, especially those of you who are, over 35 or 40 who have some perspective on this. If you look back, 20 years, all these institutions were respected. The church, this is before the whole priest sex abuse scandal came out. The church was still respected. Wall Street was a conservative place where you could park your money and not have to worry about it. The banking sector was like safe and conservative.
Yeah.
Take whatever, sports.
The president.
The politics, yeah, of course. That's the worst of it.
Remember that? The president used to be like, that was like a respected position.
Yeah. Anyway, all these institutions are just collapsing.
Yeah.
And so I think that a lot of people are saying, this doesn't fucking work anymore, right? People are saying, oh, I'm going to have less money than my parents. Well, when did that turn?
Right.
It used to be it was getting better and better. Now nobody thinks it's getting better and better, the climate change and whatever. So I think a lot of people, I think we're at this really exciting, heartbreaking, fascinating moment where a lot of people are looking for alternatives. And I think that explains why podcasts are taking off, because the technology's there, but the beauty of it is you do a podcast, you click a few buttons, it goes out to however many thousands of people are listening to it. There's no company in between. Right. There's no studio executive. There's no money man. Right. It's just you talking to whomever's listening. And so there's a level of truth and authenticity that can happen there that I think is fucking revolutionary. I think it's as revolutionary as the printing press.
Right.